On today's show, Vit Krejci has been a breakout player for the Hawks in recent weeks. We'll touch on him and some decisions that the Hawks have to make in the near future, plus your mailbag questions, a Hawks Pistons preview, and more. And all that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1686 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening here in early April. And I want to encourage you, as I always do on the podcast, to make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as YouTube. On the video side, if you missed it, I broke down the win for the Hawks on Monday evening in deep dive fashion on the same episode on Monday evening, and plenty of coverage, really wall-to-wall stuff from the Hawks for almost 1,700 episodes on this podcast. So stay tuned, subscribe to the show. We appreciate you listening to the podcast today. A lot of the show will be mailbag questions, but there are some topics, just sort of big picture stuff, as well as at the end of the podcast, we'll get into a Hawks Pistons mini preview. But one of the things I want to lead with here is that it kind of revolves around the near-term future with Vit Krejci, and I want to lead with that. So it's been a wild ride for Vit Krejci, which is important background information for what I want to get into today on the podcast. If you've been asleep for the last couple of weeks, Vit has now started the last 13 games in a row for the Hawks, and he essentially came out of nowhere. Now, he's been a guy who's been close to the organization for a while. He's been with the team a couple of different times, but he actually was in the G League a lot before this sort of resurgence. He had battled injuries mid-season. He was not on the Hawks roster to begin the season, which I think people have kind of forgotten at this point because he was around last year. He actually did not sign a contract with the Hawks. It was a two-way deal until late December. So it's been a whirlwind for Vit. He did not appear in an NBA game this season until Valentine's Day. And he was literally not in the rotation for any game for the Hawks this year until he actually started a game on March 8th. You don't usually go from not playing at all to becoming a starter overnight, but because the Hawks were down so many guys, they had 10 players active in that game with Trey out and Kobe Buffkin out, Jalen Johnson, Onyeka Okongwu, etc., and they had to kind of throw Vit in there for his interesting skill set. And that's kind of good background information because he's started 13 games now in a row. In the first 5 games, he was basically a non-entity on offense for the Hawks. He only averaged about 3.5 shots per game. He didn't shoot well from the field. He was timid. The stuff you like was still there for Vit. Like, he's always been a good ball mover, good sort of ball handler and passer for his position and his size. But the shooting was a little bit rough. Defensively, he was picked on a little bit when he first got there. But in the last 8 games, he's played more and more and more. And it really helps that he's also been on the heater as a shooter from the perimeter. But he still is not doing a ton usage-wise. Only taking about 6 shots a game. But 4 of those are threes, which is probably much better than you would have thought for Vit. He's shooting 61% from the field in that sample size the last 8 games, 53% from 3 in the last 8 games, averaging about 10 points per game, and crucially playing strong defense. Of course, those shooting numbers are boosted by his career night on Monday when he was 6 for 6 from 3 for 18 points. That's a career high in both categories there. And again, importantly, his defense has taken a big, big step forward. If you've not watched him a ton until recently, previously, last year and in the year before even, he was not completely unplayable by any means, but he certainly was below average defensively. He's still a pretty skinny, not super physical guy, but he's gotten more physical. He's gotten stronger. I would say he's improved a ton all across the board defensively, and a credit to the work in College Park. Not the only guy that's done that in College Park. Kobe Buffkin was the same thing, at least in a similar story. But he's come a long way defensively, and he does have really good tools. He's 6'8", he's long, he's smart, all that stuff. He's a good athlete. We've seen that he's sort of been limited at times, but the strength is not fantastic. But he's done a good job being aggressive and being in the right place defensively for Atlanta. Point of attack wise, not afraid of matchups. That's been something that's very, very useful for the Hawks in recent days. And at minimum, he's taking a huge step forward defensively from his previous baseline. So, with all that said, we'll come back to his play on the floor in a second. But the reason I'm coming up with that right now, beyond the intrigue of him just playing well kind of out of nowhere recently, is because, this is a big one, players on two-way contracts are not eligible to participate in the postseason. One more time, players on two-way contracts under the new CBA, the current CBA that's in place right now, are not eligible to play in the postseason. And as of right now, Vit Krejci is on a two-way contract. So the last 3 weeks or so, he's been playing 30 minutes a game and starting for the Hawks. And he's clearly gained the trust of the coaching staff. They've been playing him a ton. But as of right now, he would be ineligible to play in the playoffs if nothing else changed. So on one hand, his uptick happened because of injury in the first place. With Jalen back now alongside DeAndre Hunter, V does project to play a little bit less in the future, almost no matter what. Like having Johnson back and Hunter back, there's not quite the same amount of volume of minutes for V, even if nothing else changes. But on the other side of things, Saddiq Bey is out for the season. There's uncertainty about Trae Young's return and Onyeka Okongwu's return. Those are three guys who are staples in the rotation, including the best player, of course. And Vit has played well, so he kind of projects to be in the rotation, even if he's not going to be starting all the way through, and he still might be. But even if you say, look, in a play-in game, they're going to start Hunter and Johnson together, I wouldn't argue with you on that front. But Vit, as of right now, would be in the rotation for a play-in game. No question about that. So essentially, what do the Hawks do here is a real question that has to be asked, and we can't answer it in full. We have some context, and of course, the Hawks will be making this decision in the next couple of weeks. It isn't the exact same situation as what happened with Trent Forrest earlier this year, but it's kind of comparable in some ways. If you missed this, Trent was actually ineligible to play in the regular season because he reached his maximum games that are allowed under a two-way contract. Ultimately, the Hawks kind of pushed it back as long as they could, and then they chose to waive Patty Mills, and then they converted Trent to a standard NBA contract for the rest of the season. That was a fairly obvious solution if the Hawks wanted to keep Trent, but it would also be very interesting to see what they do with Vit here. So essentially, there are three options that are logical that the Hawks could be evaluating here with regard to Vit. Number one is they just keep Vit on a two-way, and then he won't be eligible to play if the Hawks are in the play-in/playoffs. Number two, they could waive Trent Forrest and then convert Vit or sign him to a new contract. Option number three is that they can also waive Wes Matthews and then convert Vit or sign him to a new contract as well. I'm not sure of any other pathway that makes any sense because obviously it's post-trade deadline. You can't make trades. And the only other guys who are not playing right now who are on full NBA contracts are AJ Griffin and Mo Gay, and they're not going to cut those guys. So it essentially comes down to Wes Matthews, Trent Forrest, and Vit Krejci and kind of how they rectify the situation. I had someone ask me if the Hawks could just cut Dylan Windler. They could do that, but it wouldn't help with Vit at all because Vit's Windler's on a two-way contract, and that's the whole sort of weirdness here is that Vit can't play on a two-way contract in the playoffs. So we're about 2 weeks away from the Hawks playing in the 9-10 game, very likely to happen against Chicago in either Atlanta or Chicago. A lot can change. I'm not necessarily expecting an immediate resolution on this because the Hawks have kind of been famous in pushing things off as long as they possibly can. They did that with Trent to the point where he was sort of ineligible for like 2 weeks, basically. It was a bit strange on that front. Also, though, beyond like the near term, it's perhaps an offseason discussion in some ways, but there's another angle here in that if they really believe that this is real from Vit, which it might be, he'll be a free agent at the end of the season. And they might have some urgency to try to lock him into a long-term deal because he is still young. He's 23. He'll be 24 this summer. I'm a little bit conflicted because I like Vit a lot. The skill set's really interesting with the 6'8", the passing, the skill level in general. He's played well. His defense has gotten a lot better. I'm also sort of inclined to be a tiny bit skeptical that he is definitely this guy because it's a small sample size. That's the reality. Again, it might be real. It's kind of my job to just point out, like, this kind of uptick in March in particular, when NBA basketball is kind of it's always a little bit interesting to kind of navigate March basketball because weird stuff happens. Teams are not at full strength, all that stuff. But it's kind of the part of the season that's like prone to misleading some people. So again, I'm not pouring on Vit. I like what I've seen. I kind of believe that it's real, but we don't know just yet that it is. At the same time, though, again, he's pretty young, about to be 24 this summer. That's very young. He has a pretty intriguing skill set again, especially if the defense is sort of real as an uptick, and the shooting, he's been pretty hot right now as a shooter. I just should say this out loud. His first 2 seasons in the NBA, it was relatively sparse action, but he shot about 31% from three in 2 years. And this year in the G League, again, a small sample size of actually 13 games. So the same sample size in College Park that he is in Atlanta. He's shooting like 40% in Atlanta and 27.5% in College Park. So I truly don't know what the baseline is for Vit shooting, but I do think it's below 40%. So keep that in mind. So anyway, it's a multi-pronged evaluation for the Hawks here, and they don't have a ton of time to get it done. So questions to answer here, like how good do they believe that Vit actually is? Because remember, they signed him to a two-way midseason, and part of why they did that is because they love the guy, but not because they like envision him starting games in March and April. So how good is he? how much do they value having Wes Matthews around and Trent Forrest around? The Hawks have been pretty clear they do value Wes Matthews as a locker room presence and a veteran and a leader. He executes when he's asked to play. Quinn likes Trent a lot. In the same breath, though, Kobe Buffkin is now back, hopefully to stay, and the Hawks might still get Trey back, so they won't necessarily have a huge on-court need for Trent in the future. If they had Trey, Kobe, and DeJounte, you probably wouldn't play Trent at all. Even if Trey, DJ, and Kobe, if two of those guys are available, you might not play Trent at all. So that might be the logical scenario here, is to just move on from Trent Forrest. But it is an interesting choice the Hawks have to make, both for this season, which does matter as sort of they pursue the play-in, and also for what they might be thinking about Veit in the long term. Because, again, if they could sign Veit to a long-term, team-friendly deal now, that might increase the urgency to go ahead and do that immediately, because that would be team-friendly and also give them some value in the future. Because if that is real from Veit in the last 3 weeks, that would be a player that you want to sign long-term to a cheap contract. That'd be very, very helpful for the future. So, to be clear, I do believe that provided Veit is still healthy in 2 weeks and still playing, I believe the Hawks will clear out a roster spot for him and convert him in some fashion to have him be eligible to play, because Quinn and the whole team is kind of signaling this. They want to win. And I think having Veit available, even if it's as like the 8th or 9th man in a playing game, would be worth it to kind of have them go ahead and do that. Plus, I would advocate, if they were going to do that, though, they should at least be trying to talk to Veit's agent right now and try to see if they can get him on a long-term deal for pretty cheap. So keep that in mind in the future. If I had to guess right now, I would say they probably go ahead and move on from Trent via waiver. They do like Trent Forrest, but I think the cost of losing Veit or not having Veit available in playoffs might actually be enough to kind of swing that balance. We'll find out soon enough. A lot going on there, but number one, basically, again, big picture, Veit's breakout has been out of nowhere, but it's also a lot of fun. Everybody likes Veit. I've really enjoyed it. I know Hawks fans have started to buy into, started to really enjoy it. It's been fun to watch. And then, of course, the secondary impact of just the reality is like he actually can't play in the playoffs at this moment. So we'll see if that changes. I think it will, but nothing is official just yet. All right, we'll have more coming up on this podcast, including your mailbag questions. But first, let me tell you about our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience are what bring home the winning trophy, and it's also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They have superchargers, they have exhaust kits, they have roof racks, LED headlights, and much more. Whether you are into speed, into power, or into style, eBay Motors has you covered across the board for all three of those aspects. And they have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You will always find exactly what you're looking for with the folks at eBay Motors. They also have eBay Guaranteed Fit, and that means your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money is coming back to you. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, and you are definitely not burning any cash. With the parts that you are looking for at the prices that you want, it's really easy turning your car into the MVP that you're looking for, bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Okay, with Beat Krejci out of the way, we'll have some mailbag questions for the rest of the show. And one comes from Gene, who says, I am not a college basketball watcher, but can you tell us who to watch for in the Final Four this weekend? Is there anyone on the Hawks big board? So based on the current intel that's around, both from what I've heard and what's been publicly available on ESPN and at The Athletic, these kind of mainstream boards, I think there are two guys. They're pretty much locks to be top 20 picks at the bare minimum. And then another guy who I believe is probably likely to be a first-round pick by the end of the cycle. Then there is 4 or 5 guys who are draftable if they come out in this draft, all in the Final Four with 4 teams remaining. So we'll start with the big guns, and that is, of course, UConn, the favorite to win the whole college thing, if you care about that. But on the draft side, Donovan Clingan is the biggest sort of riser in this entire tournament, probably. He was awesome last week as a center. He's a legitimate 7'2", big-time center. I think people have gotten a little bit aggressive on him the last couple of days. Like, I've seen him talked about as a potential number 1 pick overall. I wouldn't go quite that far, but he is a lottery pick for me for sure. The Hawks could take him. There's a chance he's going to be gone by now because the buzz is really real on that, even before the Hawks could choose to take him. But if Orlando wanted to move on for Capella, it would make sense to kind of maybe target Clingan as a nice pairing with Okongwu in a versatile and defensive-minded front court. He's an awesome defensive prospect at the very least, so keep an eye on him. I got to watch closely for sure. The other lottery pick is Stephon Castle, his teammate at UConn, a two-way perimeter guy. Definitely a lottery pick for me, intriguing on and off the ball. The big question is his shooting on offense, but I like the defense, 6'6", good ball skills, good ball handler, etc., good decision maker. I like him quite a bit. I'm not sure if he's like a perfect fit with Trey and DeJounte, but if they want to trade one of those guys, for instance, I think Castle would be certainly, everyone's looking for two-way wings, and a guy who's 6'6" with real tools and real talent would be very appealing if he is still available when the Hawks pick. Then you have three more guys from UConn: Alex Caravan, Cam Spencer, and Tristan Newton. Caravan's like a top 40 guy for me, probably a 6'8" shooter. He can play a little bit of defense. He knows how to play. Not a huge upside guy, but certainly is a shooter that could be interesting for the Hawks. Spencer is, I'm a little bit lower on, but he's a real shooter as well at 6'4". He's just kind of old. I'm not sure what else there is at the NBA level other than shooting, but certainly he can shoot it. He's also really feisty and gets a lot of attention for that. Tristan Newton I actually like as well. An awesome college player, good passer. He's scored quite a bit this year at UConn. He's an older guy, but certainly could be maybe a high-level guy in Europe, but also could be good enough to make the NBA as well. So I like him quite a bit, kind of a older sleeper type at this point for the NBA when it comes to that. Beyond UConn, and that is the number one team for sure to watch from draft circles in this Final Four, Purdue has Zach Edey. So Zach Edey is probably the most famous player in college basketball because he's the best player in college basketball from a college basketball standpoint. Now, there's a huge split on him as a prospect. Again, this is not a college basketball podcast, but he's one of the best college players of my adult life. He is that good. He's about to be a two-time National Player of the Year. He is an elite college player. And there's some weird discussions about him, like just being tall. It's not true. He's an awesome, dominant player on offense and defense at the college level. On offense in the NBA, I buy it. He's 7'4", legitimately 7'4", great touch, great feel, good passer, etc. The question that divides people on him is really his defense and his impact at the NBA level because of that. 20 years ago, he would go really high in the draft. But defensively, people are not sure, and that includes me, that he can defend in space. He's gotten better at doing that, but he's so big and he's kind of lumbering at the NBA level. He'll have to prove it to me, honestly, to kind of get all the way there. I think it'd be totally fine to take him in the first round. For me, I wouldn't take him in the lottery. I probably wouldn't have him in my top 25, but I get it at least. And I think based on the intel, he's probably going to go in the first round. Someone's going to believe it and take him, and I will understand that. There's a chance that we get Edey versus Klingon in the final. That would be awesome to watch, and looking forward to that. But Edey is a real prospect, for sure. The other two teams are the underdogs in college and the underdogs when it comes to draft prospects. NC State is the story of the tournament. They have an awesome college player named DJ Burns, who is a 6'8", 6'9", 280-pound center who is super fun to watch. I don't think he's an NBA player, but certainly he's fun, and I look forward to covering him. I will be at the Final Four in Glendale this weekend. Alabama has two guys, Grant Nelson and Mark Sears, who are second-round picks probably. Nelson had a huge game last weekend against UNC. They got him a lot of attention. And Sears has been awesome this year, all-American level. He's also really efficient and really productive. He's just kind of small. He's 6'1"-ish, and he's basically just a pure scorer. So it's possible, but the NBA has soured on those small score-first point guard types. So we will see. You got to be so incredibly good to be able to do that. And very few guys are. The Hawks, of course, have one of them in Trae Young, but he's also one of the best passers in the world, and Sears is not that. So anyway, that's kind of the layout of the Final Four when it comes to draft stuff. It isn't the best one, but UConn is loaded, both college and pro, and then Edey is a real guy, and then some supplementary guys around that to keep an eye on if you are only watching for the draft. This is kind of related to that, but a quick reminder that the Kings pick is still a coin flip to convey right now in 2024. 47% chance on ESPN's BPI right now to have the Kings pick convey, which basically means they make the playoffs in the West. I will have much more on this, but as a reminder, one more time, if the Kings make the 8-team playoffs, not the play-in, the 8-team playoffs at the end of the play-in, then the Hawks will have their pick. If they do not make the playoffs, which means they're either missing the playoffs either before the play-in or they lose in the play-in, that pick will roll over to 2025. So there's a chance the Hawks only have one pick in the first round of this draft. They also might have two in the top 20. We will see, but we won't know for a couple more weeks how that's going to break down. Some more rapid-fire questions on the podcast, then we'll have some more deeper ones at the end of the show. One comes from Dylan, who says, "What's up with the Hawks injuries?" Well, Dylan, that's an interesting question. Also, he adds, "Why do we never know when players are going to come back?" I wish I had a better answer to that, to be honest with you. Obviously, the Hawks have been really banged up for a long time now. They got a little bit of a sort of uptick with the return of Jalen Johnson and Kobe Buffkin on Monday. Those guys will play again on Wednesday. That's obviously a great sign moving forward. But the organization has made a conscious decision to basically never give a specific timeline for a player to return to action. I've kind of become a meme about this, but reevaluation is not the same as return. And the Hawks always list reevaluation timelines, which allows them more flexibility to give updates or not give updates. Basically, it's pretty cryptic sometimes. I'll be the first one to say that. It is frustrating to cover, much less be a fan of. Also, Quinn Snyder is the public-facing guy who speaks to the media the most, other than the players. Landry Fields might talk to the media 5 times a year. Quinn talks before and after every game. But Quinn, as the head coach, it's not his job to talk about that, but he's kind of the only face of it, and he basically refuses to divulge injury stuff. I asked Quinn last week about Okongwu, and in response to that question, he essentially said he's not going to be talking about injuries at all this year, deferring to the official releases. The problem is the Hawks don't always give official releases, so sometimes we're just flying blind, to be honest with you. I wish I had a better answer, but the Hawks have just kind of chosen this pathway. They're going with reevaluations. There are a lot of teams, they're not alone in this. A lot of teams are doing similar things to the Hawks, so it's not just them, but it is a little bit weird / frustrating to kind of follow. Right now, we just don't know anything about Trey for the most part. That's a weird injury. It's a long-term thing. He was in a cast, etc. But like Okongwu, they finally gave something yesterday, which I talked about on the show, but like they went like 2 weeks with no update, even though it was kind of a different situation. So they are cryptic at times, and I wish I could help you with more information, but I don't have it for you. Last one in the rapid fire round, JJ says, is there any chance that Bogey is not getting love for Sixth Man of the Year because he is starting and won't be eligible anymore for the award? I know I've talked about this a lot lately, including last night. I will be short on this one and save the politicking for later on. But to be very clear, Bogey is going to be eligible for Sixth Man of the Year, no matter what happens. He could get hurt tomorrow and miss the rest of the season. He could play. He could start every game the rest of the season. He would still be eligible either way. He is already qualified for Sixth Man of the Year. The only qualifier is that you have to play enough games overall, but also you play off the bench in more than half of the games that you play. And Bogey is already well beyond that. So keep that in mind. He is going to be eligible no matter what. And while we're here quickly, I think he's maybe number 1 on my list, but certainly in the top 3 of Sixth Man of the Year for me. He's averaging the most points per game of any qualified candidate for the award, 17 a game, has a solid assist rate. He has the best on-off numbers on the entire Hawks roster. The Hawks have a minus 7.9 net rating with Bogey off the floor this year. So basically, they are a bottom 5 team in the league when Bogey sits, and when he plays, they're a playoff team. That's a pretty wide margin for one guy. And I'm not saying he's their best player. He's not. But he's been extremely valuable, and he's the only guy on the team that does what he does. Now, Garrison kind of replicates the shooting, but Bogey has both. Bogey has the shooting and the playmaking and the off-the-dribble stuff. Whereas Garrison does the shooting. Obviously, Trey and DeJounte are different than Bogey, but Bogey is the one guy that's like a fire drill for opponents every night, and I think he's been underrated this year. I'm sure that's because of the Hawks' record, but I think he should be certainly near the top of the list when it comes to Sixth Man of the Year voting, and he's not quite gotten there this year for whatever reason, but hopefully he will get some attention down the stretch of the campaign. All right, we'll have more to come on your questions from the mailbag, as well as a quick preview of Hawks Pistons. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends at Amazon Fire TV. Amazon Fire TV is just a destination for sports, live games, highlights, in-depth analysis, and much more. Fire TV offers you amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV Stick you can plug in to your existing TV, and it provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV for you. Whether it's baseball or basketball or other sports that you might be interested in, you are going to want to have a Fire TV option. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us, including me, at Locked On Sports Network. And also, we are here to stay. And most of the big pro leagues are there. And also the biggest college conferences are also at Fire TV channels. They'll dive you into all of the game analysis, highlights, and much more. Keep you up to date, I should say, on all the latest in the world of sports. That includes March Madness, the NBA, MLB, football instant season, and much more. Not to mention great news. They have gaming, they have entertainment, travel, cooking. Those videos are there as well. Check out the Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices right now. If you've not checked those out just yet on Fire TV channels, you absolutely should. Trust me on this. And to learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. One more time, that is amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. Okay, a question from Gideon, who says, it might be because I just listened to the episode about the win over Chicago, but it seems like the Hawks are shooting the ball great right now. Do the stats say that, and can it continue? So, number one, there's a great piece from Hassan over at Peachtree Hoops about the Hawks shooting in recent days from three-point range. It went up before the Chicago game, but still, as noted in the question, the Hawks shot the heck out of the ball again last night, so it still applies. for sure. That's a good piece. I could definitely do the entire show on this. I'm not going to, but the short answer is that yes, the Hawks are shooting the ball fantastically well lately, and it's probably not going to continue like this. I think they're a little bit unstable right now, how hot they've been, but also they were pretty unlucky early in the year, I thought. So maybe there's some balancing out happening late in the year to kind of combat their early struggles. So I'll say this first. People sometimes ask me why I point out the three-point shooting disparities and variances pretty regularly on the podcast and maybe emphasize that on purpose. The answer is because it's really important to winning basketball games. It's not always the most fun explanation in the world to say, look, a team was hot or a team wasn't hot, and that's why they lost the game. But honestly, it does matter a ton to wins and losses. So some examples of that. On offense this year, the Hawks are 13-5 in their 18 best three-point shooting games of the season by percentage. So basically, when the Hawks shoot really well from three, 40+% from three, they are 13-5 in their top 18 games as a shooting team. Not a huge surprise, but it's just kind of logical. If you shoot the ball that well, you're going to win. On the other side, they are 2-13 in their 15 worst three-point shooting games this year. Again, not a huge shock, but that is a pretty stark difference. When they shoot well, they win. When they don't shoot well, they lose most of the time. Then on defense, it's the same story. So their 17 best three-point shooting defense games of the year, they're 13-4 in those games. So if the opponent misses their shots from three-point range, the Hawks generally win. And then on the other side of things, the Hawks are 4-14 in their 18 worst three-point defense games of the season. So in short, again, not breaking any ground here, but this is just the reality of the numbers. When you make threes, you're likely to win. When your opponents make threes, you're likely to lose, and so on and so forth. So it matters a lot to your results, how you shoot from three and how your opponent shoots from three as well. So with that out of the way, the Hawks are shooting 40.6% from three in the last 13 games. That's number 2 in the NBA over that span. Prior to that, the rest of the year, they were 35.9%. So about a 5% drop off. That's a huge difference in this context. And also, they have they've only shot 47% or higher from three in 8 games this year. So that's a high number. 47% is a sky high number, but they've done that 8 times. 5 of those 8 games are in the last 3 weeks, basically. So they've been really hot from three, and it's definitely helped their performance. Taking the highest percentage of threes in the league that are quote-unquote tightly guarded per NBA.com, the Hawks are right now, basically taking that many. And they're also shooting incredibly well on those shots. Those are the ones I'd be a little bit worried about. They're taking some tighter, more contested shots and making them. They're also taking the lowest percentage of wide open threes in the league in that stretch, which means they're not creating the wide open looks that they often do. And that's a little bit troubling. But when they get them, they're making almost all of them. They're shooting 48% on open threes since that time period. That's number 1 in the league. Garrison Matthews is on an all-time heater right now. 50% from three in the last 13 games. A lot of those were contested shots. He's red hot right now. Awesome shooter, but that's a little bit over his head, you would say. Pete Krejci, 47% in that sample size. Wes Matthews, 47% in that sample size. Jalen Johnson, 41%. DeJounte, 40%. Bogey, 43%. All of those guys are above their normal baseline. Essentially, everyone on the roster in the last 13 games is above their normal baseline from three, other than DeAndre Hunter, who is below his. So that's a little bit of a trade-off, but still, you'll take it if everybody else is shooting the ball like they have been in recent days. The Hawks are actually in the bottom 5 in shot profile, quote unquote, during that sample size. That's worse than they've been all year long. They just happen to be making a ton of threes, and that definitely helps. So to answer the question, they definitely are shooting well right now. They're probably, quote unquote, due for that on some level, but it's not going to sustain at this level for very long, I wouldn't think. But hey, maybe they'll be able to keep it going for 2 more weeks and have the games actually, when the games actually matter a ton in the play-in/playoffs, if you shoot well, they'll be in decent shape there. And I got to be clear, this is not the only area to circle. I'll be honest about that. They've been really good on the glass recently, especially on the offensive glass in recent days. Capella is playing incredibly well since about March 1st or even before that. In fact, he has the biggest on-off split on the team by a wide margin. They're like plus 10 with play on the floor in the last 6 weeks. He's playing great. Murray had a fantastic month of March. He was a Player of the Month nominee. That included just the lights-out ISO game that he's been playing in recent days. So, it's not just three-point shooting, but part of the explanation as to why the Hawks have been winning some close games and winning probably more than they would have been expected to win recently is that they are shooting the heck out of the ball. And in the end, if you have to choose one thing to do well on an NBA court, you might choose three-point shooting because it's really indicative as to wins and losses. And that's been the case in recent days for the Hawks. All right, a preview here at the end of the podcast of Hawks Pistons. This is a game on Wednesday. The Hawks only have 7 games left in the regular season. Only 2 of them I would describe as very, very favorable as far as pregame projections, and that, of course, includes this one against Detroit. So the Pistons have lost 9 of the last 10 games. They're very bad. They have the worst record in the NBA this year. They are 13-62. They're also 6-30 on the road, and the Hawks have beaten them both times that they played so far this year. Now, those games were actually fairly competitive, but it's been a long time. It was like in December when they played last, so a lot's changed since then. Also, the Pistons have had a pretty impressive stretch from Cade Cunningham, their best player, but he actually is listed as questionable for this game. But he comes in with 32 points or more in 3 straight games. He's kind of the one worry spot on Detroit for the opposition, but they're below average on basically everything on offense and defense. The only thing they're really good at on the floor is defensive rebounding because they are pretty big in general. But I would circle turnovers as a factor to keep an eye on Wednesday. The Pistons are 27th in the league in offensive turnover rate, and they're 28th in the league in defensive turnover rate. So they give the ball away a lot, and they don't create a lot of turnovers, and the Hawks should take advantage of that, hopefully, you would imagine, on Wednesday. Injury stuff, the Hawks are actually cleaner than they've been in a long time. Jalen and Kobe are not listed at all on the injury report for Wednesday. That's a very encouraging development after they came back on Monday. Only 5 guys out. I mean, it's still a lot of guys out, but it feels like only because they've had so many guys out. It's Trey, Onyeka, AJ Griffin, Mo Gay, and of course Saddiq Bey, who's out for the season. So only 5 guys out. Keep an eye on that in the future. For Detroit, Cade Cunningham, again, is questionable to play for Detroit. Marcus Sasser is questionable as well, and they will not have Quentin Grimes, Simone Fontecchio, Isaiah Stewart, or Asar Thompson in this game. As of right now, as I'm recording this podcast early evening on Tuesday, our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook have the Hawks favored by 12 points in this game. That would be one of the biggest favorites the Hawks have been all year long. So on paper, a very, very favorable matchup for Atlanta on Wednesday. It's a quote-unquote taking care of business spot. This is one you need to win if obviously you want to sort of achieve your goals. The Hawks had a big win on Monday for their play-in seeding and positioning, but you don't want to give one back on Wednesday against a bad team. So if they win, they'll be keeping it locked up with the Bulls in the pursuit of the 9 seed. There was a whole debate on my mentions about like how much the 9 seed matters. I'm not telling you it matters a ton. You'd still, in a vacuum, rather play at home in the 9-10 game than on the road. That's all it means. Doesn't mean the end of the world if they don't get the 9 seed. Absolutely not. But you still, I think if you ask Quinn and everybody else on the team, you'd rather play at home. So that's the stakes the next couple of weeks until the play-in actually happens, because literally 99% chance that it's a Hawks versus Bulls 9 versus 10 game. It's either going to be in Atlanta or in Chicago in about 2 weeks, and that game will decide the Hawks' immediate future. We'll see until then. All right, that's all I have on today's podcast. Please subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple and Spotify. We're also on YouTube if you enjoy that platform on the video side. Please like, rate, review, share, all that fun stuff on your podcast platform of choice. Also spread the word about the podcast to your friends or Hawks fans or message boards or whatever. Go ahead and share the link somewhere to someone that you might enjoy the podcast. I really would appreciate that. That's the best possible thing you can do to help us, is to auto download the podcast as well as spread the word and also support our sponsors across the board. We have great sponsors. You can find them in the description of this podcast if you want more information on all of them. Also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Roll. I write about the Hawks on a regular basis at patreon.com/BT Roll. And I also share some audio there as well, just some clips from press conferences, etc. A nice little addition to the full-on, full-blown, all-inclusive coverage on this podcast network. So check out Locked On Hawks. Check out the entire Locked On Podcast Network. And I appreciate you being here. We'll see you after the game on Wednesday evening.